welcome. Thank you for joining us. Thank you so much.
Good to see you.
How are you?
Thank you. Hey.
Hello.
I didn't know I had my own
Welcome.
music.
Just
I had
Yeah.
my own music.
I was waiting for the walk-on music.
Yeah, they made you wait. Everybody wait to get the right walk-on music. Does
Right.
everybody have their own
We were
walk-on
going to
music?
Yeah,
play
we
the
all have
entire
a-
homecoming video, but it would have taken
But it's taking too long.
Wait, I will say though that the picture that y'all have in your program is actually of my brother, Joaquin. Yeah, you have my brother's picture. Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Prove it.
Listen,
He would say that that's a good thing because he's better looking than I am, but you know.
all right. Well, you're home. You're in your home state of Texas.
That's right.
Uh,
Good to be here in Texas.
I'm gonna tell you or ask you. Our first question hits many people, not only here in Texas but across the country. It's about gentrification.
Yeah.
Gentrification has forced many of us further and further from our jobs, driving long distances, looking for affordable places to live. What would be your plan as president to address this a social justice issue, environmental issue that affects, above all, young people and working people?
Yeah. Thank you very much for the question, and thank you all very much for having me here today. It's great to be here in Texas. To everybody that isn't from Texas, bienvenidos a Texas. So I imagine that a lot of folks in this audience have grappled with this reality, which is that today we see throughout the country in many neighborhoods in the United States, especially in communities of color, and especially in low-income communities of color, a lot of people being displaced. And I can tell you that if I had to grade every single community that I saw when I was HUD Secretary, I was Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, to give them a letter grade, and I visited 100 different communities, I would not give a single community an A for what they're doing when it comes to gentrification. Because usually what happens is that there's a neighborhood that hasn't been paid attention to, it's been underinvested in, the people have been largely ignored, and then it starts getting some improvements, and new people start moving in and fixing up some of the houses or the apartments, and then they start getting some restaurants or grocery store or bars, and then all of a sudden there's this cycle that happens, and by the time there's a response, it's past a tipping point, and people are getting displaced. Austin is a great example here in Texas. In Austin, on the east side of Austin, over the last 15 years, they have lost about 50% of their African-American population, right? So that's just one example. The question is, what would I do about that? I think we have to tackle this in many different ways that connects the dots. First of all, we need to make sure that there's a greater supply of affordable housing so that people can afford to live in their own neighborhood that they choose to live in. Secondly, we have to find ways to provide relief for the people that are there, the residents who are living there, so that they are not as impacted, for instance, as property taxes go up, as the cost of living in those neighborhoods go up. There have been a couple proposals, for instance, here in the Texas legislature on how you might provide property tax relief to help buffer low-income residents and prevent displacement. At the national level, I would encourage and invest in communities so that people could find affordable housing supply where they want to live, stay in these neighborhoods, and then be buffered against that kind of displacement. The other thing that we need to do, though, is enforce our Fair Housing Act. And when I was Secretary of HUD, we promulgated, or we passed the most groundbreaking rule called Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing, which was unfinished business from the 1968 Fair Housing Act, and basically said to communities that got federal taxpayer money through HUD, you have to get more serious about equal housing opportunity in your jurisdiction. So, we promulgated that rule. The first plans from cities started to come in October, I think it was October 4th of 2016. And then when Dr. Carson and the Trump administration got in, they actually put that on ice. If I'm president, one of the first things that I'm doing is making sure that we bring back affirmatively furthering fair housing so that every community has to answer for equal housing opportunity. And I believe that that's going to help to address this issue of gentrification.
And Secretary Castro, if I could ask a quick follow-up. You came, obviously you were HUD Secretary under President Obama, who came in just at the height of the Great Recession. And came in, and that was his first task, was trying to reverse that damage. And a lot of that damage was to families of color whose housing disappeared in the mortgage crisis. You saw predatory lenders attempted to be reined in by bills like Dodd-Frank. A lot of that has been rolled back under this administration. A, do you think that some Wall Street bankers should have gone to prison over their conduct to help bring on the Great Recession? And B, what would you do to reinstate some of the protections against predatory lending that so impact communities of color?
Yeah, thank you for that question. What happened now about a decade, a little bit more than a decade ago, decimated black wealth especially, also wealth in the Latina community. And I do think that there were successes in the Obama administration. I do think that there are big, powerful forces that were taken on, but I agree with you, I agree with the spirit of the question, that I believe there should be more accountability for people on Wall Street for what happened. And if I'm president, I will make sure that no matter who you are, nobody is above the law in this country. And that includes people on Wall Street. For communities out there, the lesson that we can learn from the last decade is that our initiatives, our programs need to be focused on making sure that people can stay in their home, right? And that they can help recoup that wealth, because especially for black families and Latino families, their house oftentimes is really their only source of wealth. Right? That's it. So what can we do? We can strengthen the FHA. The FHA used to be part of the problem. It used to sanction redlining, basically housing discrimination. Today, about 40% of first-time African-American home buyers get an FHA-insured mortgage. So it's a very powerful tool to help ensure that people have opportunity. We can make sure that we invest in things like community development block grants and home funding, and those things that help build up community. Those are the kinds of things that I'd like to see. And during the course of this campaign, I look forward to releasing my own housing proposal that will include what we're going to do in distressed communities to make sure that everybody can prosper, not just some people.
Great.
All right. We have some questions.
We have 2 questions and not that much time, but I'm hoping we can have them both. Welcome.
Hi, Secretary Castro. I'm Destiny Lopez, co-director of the All Above All Action Fund. Since the passage of the Hyde Amendment in 1976, anti-abortion policymakers have added abortion funding bans to Medicaid, Medicare, the Children's Health Insurance Program, for federal employees and their dependents, Peace Corps volunteers, Native Americans, women in federal prisons and detention centers, military service women, veterans and their dependents, and low-income women in the District of Columbia. Bans on insurance coverage of abortion often create an insurmountable barrier to women of color already struggling to get affordable health care. How will you ensure that everyone can get insurance coverage for abortion in your first term as president?
Thank you. Thank you very much for the question. Let me begin by saying that what I believe in is that everybody in this country should get health care, not just health insurance, right? That too often in our nation, health insurance is you getting a denial letter that tells you the 2 or 3 reasons why you can't actually get the procedure or the treatment that you need. Health care is actually getting that treatment. I also believe in a woman's right to choose, that it is an issue of reproductive freedom and justice. And so I don't think that whether a woman has the resources to cover her reproductive health care needs should determine whether she's able to get that health care. And so I would absolutely support and work for the opportunity that everybody have to exercise their choice. And, you know, I disagree with measures that have been taken to essentially stymie the ability of some women to not have that choice. Here in Texas, this is a tremendous example of what happens when people with a right-wing ideology take hold and they're able to keep some people out, right? As president, I will do everything that I can to ensure that everybody has that right.
Thank you, Secretary.
One more question from the audience. Welcome.
Hi, Secretary Castro. I'm going to be asking my question first in English and then in Spanish. My name is Jessica Suan. I'm from Texas Organizing Project, and I'm from San Antonio, Texas. There are 140 million fellow Americans who live in persistent poverty right now. What would you do as president to address the poverty crisis in your first term? Now in Spanish. Mi nombre es Jessica, soy de Texas Organizing Project desde San Antonio, Texas. Hay actualmente 140 millones de americanos que viven en la pobreza actualmente. ¿Qué hará como presidente para abordar la crisis de la pobreza en su primer mandato?
Gracias por su pregunta, Jessica. I grew up with my brother Joaquin and my mother and my grandmother. My mother was raising us as a single parent after the age of 8. My parents were never married, but they split up when we were 8. And I know what it's like to struggle. And so I also know that we need to do many things and connect the dots. First of all, we need to raise the minimum wage. We need to support legislation like the Paycheck Fairness Act so that women get paid equal pay for equal work, especially women of color who are shortchanged the most. We need to invest in things like affordable housing so that people, and we haven't done that in a serious way in 40 years, so that people can find a safe, decent, affordable place to live. We need to make sure that we invest in educational opportunity. That's why I support not only tuition-free public universities and community colleges and apprenticeship programs, but also starting at the beginning, childcare and universal pre-K for 3- and 4-year-olds, so that we help our families succeed. I also believe that we need to ensure that there's justice in our justice system. Right? Too many people are living in poverty today because they were incarcerated when they never should have been incarcerated in the first place. And I've called for giving people a first chance in life because too oftentimes people, we don't even talk about a second chance, too oftentimes people don't even get a first chance in life. And I believe that if we put all of those things together and other things, that we can ensure that we lift people out of poverty. In addition to tackling the bigger issues like a tax code that we need to rewrite to reward work instead of wealth and so many other things.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. So Secretary Castro, we've been asking each of the candidates, there are going to be 20 and counting as of Thursday. So why should women of color choose you as their nominee?
Thank you for the question. And, I grew up, I am only here because of two very strong women of color. My grandmother, Victoria, who came from Mexico when she was 7, she came across the border in 1922. She never finished elementary school, so she worked as a maid, a cook, and a babysitter for her whole life. And she raised my mom as a single parent. My mom was able to become the first one to graduate from high school and then go on to college, and she raised my brother and me as a single parent. And so I grew up seeing both the struggles and the promise of two strong women of color. And I have dedicated my time in public service to making sure that people just like my mother and my grandmother could do better in this country. It's why I focused in my time as mayor and as HUD secretary so much on trying to deliver for communities that are vulnerable, that are struggling, whether it was by passing pre-K for SA in San Antonio, by doing a sales tax initiative that people thought, like, why are you getting involved in education? You're the mayor, you have nothing to do with that. But I saw that as a key to making sure that people that are too often left behind could get ahead. I also, when we were at HUD, fought to make sure that people would not be discriminated against. We for instance, went after Wells Fargo and settled with them because they weren't giving mortgages to women who were pregnant because they were assuming, well, they may not go back to work, and so they're more of a risk. We cracked down on things like that, right? I also see the intersectionality of all of these issues. When we were at HUD, for instance, we promulgated something called the Equal Access Order, an expansion of that, so that if you are part of the LGBTQ community, if you're transgender, that you could show up at a federally funded shelter and be accommodated according to your preference. Because we know that people are not just, they're not one-dimensional, right? They face many different struggles in their life. And to answer your question very directly, why should women of color choose me? It's because I have a track record. I have a track record of getting things done for vulnerable communities, especially women of color, and that is exactly what I will do if I'm elected President of the United States. Thank y'all very much.
Secretary Castro, thank you so much. Thank you for joining us to See the People. Thank you.
Thank you.
Secretary Castro!
Thank you.
Thank you.